For most people, Sun Tzu is a name linked to battlefields, legendary generals, and strategy quotes reposted by entrepreneurs who've never opened his book. He's usually framed as a prophet of victory, a mysterious thinker who cracked the hidden psychology of war. But that image completely misses what made him important. Strip away the slogans and the mythology, and something far more surprising emerges. Sun Tzu wasn't fixated on winning battles at all. He was fixated on avoiding them. His concern wasn't honor, discipline, or domination. It was cost. In an era where constant warfare was draining states to the brink of collapse, Sun Tzu became the first thinker to make an uncomfortable reality explicit. The greatest threat to a nation isn't always the enemy across the battlefield. It's the expense that follows the war. People assume The Art of War is a manual about combat. In truth, it's a book about economics. Welcome to the Finance Rewind, where money, power, and history intersect, and nothing is ever as straightforward as it seems. To understand Sun Tzu's financial brilliance, you have to understand the world that produced him. His ideas didn't appear in a vacuum. They emerged from a society buckling under the weight of its own ambitions. China, during the late spring and autumn period and the early warring states era, roughly the 6th to 5th centuries BCE, was divided into rival states, each convinced it could dominate the rest, and each emptying its coffers trying. Warfare was relentless, alliances were fragile, armies expanded decade after decade, shifting from elite chariot warfare to massive infantry forces that demanded food, metal, logistics, and taxation on an unprecedented scale. These states weren't just fighting enemies, they were stress-testing their economies. Every time a ruler sent troops into the field, he was borrowing against the future of his state, and more often than not, that debt came due. Modern audiences tend to imagine ancient warfare as heroic and tactical, but in this period, war was first and foremost a logistical nightmare. The instant an army mobilized, costs began to accumulate. Wagons, grain, horses, craftsmen, armor, cooks, blacksmiths, porters, all of it had to be supplied, fed, or paid. A campaign that dragged on for months could ruin a smaller state. One that lasted a year could destabilize even a powerful one. Yet trapped in mutual fear and rivalry, these kingdoms kept fighting anyway. It was an arms race long before the term existed, and it pushed the political system toward collapse.
This is the reality Sun Tzu confronted, not as a detached philosopher meditating in isolation, but as a strategist trying to solve an economic disaster masquerading as a military problem. In the West, he's often portrayed as an ancient mentor for CEOs, but in practice, he resembled a risk analyst more than a warrior poet. He examined costs, timelines, supply chains, and sustainability, and reached a stark conclusion. The prevailing way states waged war could not continue. Winning meant nothing if the treasury was destroyed in the process. Most rulers believed their greatest danger was the opposing army. Sun Tzu believed it was their own spending. That's why the most critical line in The Art of War appears right at the beginning, before discussions of deception, terrain, or morale. He writes, "War is of vital importance to the state. Not noble, not heroic, vital, meaning volatile, dangerous, and capable of destroying the very society it aims to protect." The rest of the text is devoted to explaining how war can be limited, managed, and made as inexpensive as possible. At its core, the book reveals Sun Tzu's true fixation, reducing financial risk. Even his most famous insights are economic principles in disguise. When he argues that the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting, he isn't being mystical, he's describing cost avoidance. It's the ancient equivalent of achieving results without burning capital. When he warns that no country has ever profited from prolonged warfare, he's stating a literal fiscal reality. Extended campaigns hollow out a state's ability to survive. And when he prioritizes speed, efficiency, intelligence, and psychological pressure, it's because these tools are cheaper than maintaining massive armies. Sun Tzu wasn't trying to win battles, he was trying to stop states from bankrupting themselves in the attempt.
To grasp just how radical Sun Tzu's perspective was, you first have to look at what warfare in China had been like before him. For generations, conflict among aristocratic elites followed ritualized patterns where honor and tradition mattered more than results, and financial consequences were barely considered. But as populations expanded and military technology evolved, war scaled into something entirely different. States were forced to standardize currency,
overhaul tax systems, and build administrative machinery simply to keep armies in the field. Warfare ceased to be a private affair of elites and became a national undertaking, and with it, a potentially catastrophic financial gamble. Sun Tzu recognized that the old way of thinking had turned deadly. War could no longer be treated as ceremonial theater or symbolic competition. It had become a budgetary hazard that demanded unemotional, analytical scrutiny. This is what makes Sun Tzu such a historical outlier. While most military thinkers celebrated combat and valor, he approached war like an accountant reviewing liabilities. He evaluated supply chains, resource exhaustion, and what we would now call opportunity cost, centuries before those concepts had names. He had little tolerance for commanders who pursued personal glory at the expense of long-term stability, because he understood something many modern leaders still struggle to accept. Every battlefield decision is, at its core, a decision about a state's financial survival. Misjudge those calculations, and the loss isn't limited to troops. The state itself collapses.
Read The Art of War through this economic lens, and its tone shifts dramatically. What initially sounds like poetic philosophy begins to resemble a ledger. Sun Tzu opens by outlining 5 foundational elements that determine success or failure, and beneath the abstract language lies a straightforward reality. These are cost drivers. The moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline aren't mystical abstractions. They're categories of resource management. He's asking practical questions. What will this war consume? How cohesive is your society? How resilient are your people? How efficiently can you move men and material? How effective is your administration? In modern terms, he's conducting a comprehensive risk analysis. From the very first chapter, Sun Tzu makes it clear that leaders incapable of calculating cost have no business planning strategy. That's why so much of the text focuses on logistics rather than battlefield heroics. Sun Tzu devotes an entire section to the economics of sustaining an army, and his logic is unforgiving. When he notes that an army operating 20 miles from home loses the value of 100 measures of grain, the message is simple. Distance equals expense, and extended distance compounds it. He explains that moving supplies drains the treasury faster than paying soldiers, that keeping armies in the field weakens agricultural production, and that reckless commanders can bankrupt a nation while winning insignificant engagements. For a book on war, it shows remarkably little interest in fighting and an intense concern with cost. He urges rulers to rely on enemy resources whenever possible, not as a clever trick, but as a financial necessity. He criticizes prolonged campaigns, not because they lack decisiveness, but because they are fiscally irresponsible. Sun Tzu understood a truth many modern states forget. Logistics don't merely support strategy, they are the strategy.
Sun Tzu's view of intelligence follows the same economic reasoning. Today, debates over surveillance funding or intelligence budgets are framed around security, ethics, or national interest. Sun Tzu framed them around efficiency. One well-placed spy, he argued, could stop an entire army from marching the wrong way. A single piece of intercepted information could spare a state enormous expense. When he wrote that what enables the wise ruler and capable general to conquer and achieve extraordinary results is foreknowledge, he wasn't praising bravery or raw power. He was highlighting information. In the ancient world, foreknowledge was simply data. To Sun Tzu, intelligence wasn't a supplement to warfare. It was the least expensive and most effective weapon available. He understood that wasting information was the same as wasting money. Even his obsession with speed is rooted in financial logic. Speed is the essence of war, he writes, a line often read as encouragement for aggression. But his point is more precise. Speed reduces cost. When he urges commanders to strike where the enemy is unprepared, he's describing a cost-benefit maneuver. Using timing and
surprise to avoid the expense of direct confrontation. Every extra day an army spends marching, feeding, and waiting compounds financial risk. A delayed victory bleeds resources. A victory achieved through movement and misdirection preserves them. Sun Tzu's emphasis on flexibility, adaptability, and psychological leverage isn't philosophical ornamentation, it's budget discipline. His most profound financial insight, however, is embedded in the structure of the book itself. Everything revolves around opportunity cost. Every decision eliminates a cheaper alternative. Sun Tzu didn't reject war outright. He rejected waste. And the greatest waste, in his view, was fighting battles that never needed to be fought. That's why he praises commanders who break resistance without bloodshed, who succeed through diplomacy, intimidation, alliances, and misdirection. These aren't secondary tactics, they are the primary ones, because they preserve the state's limited capital. In one of his starkest warnings, he cautions that rulers who take pleasure in warfare will destroy their own kingdoms. Beneath the poetic language lies a harsh accounting rule. Treat war like a passion instead of a liability, and eventual collapse is inevitable.
Sun Tzu's financial clarity becomes even more evident when you look at what happened to the states around him. Some poured vast resources into prolonged sieges that hollowed out their tax bases and triggered internal unrest. Others applied his logic, relying on intelligence, alliances, and rapid action to avoid the economic death spiral of extended conflict. The states that viewed war as a financial instrument to be used sparingly and strategically endured. Those that treated it as a contest of honor or brute strength exhausted themselves. Sun Tzu wasn't just correct in theory. Events repeatedly confirmed his conclusions. This is where the analysis shifts from ancient history to the modern world. The uncomfortable reality is that Sun Tzu's warnings have echoed through every major conflict of the past 2 centuries. Governments continue to make the same mistake he tried to prevent, entering wars without accounting for long-term economic strain, then watching their budgets fracture under the weight. The Soviet Union in Afghanistan, the United States in Vietnam, the imperial powers of the First World War. These conflicts didn't fail because of weak armies. They failed because the financial logic behind them collapsed. Sun Tzu would have recognized the pattern immediately. Prolonged warfare destroys states faster than enemies ever can. At the same time, the tools he advocated, intelligence, deception, precision operations, rapid maneuver, and indirect pressure, now form the core of modern strategy precisely because they cost less. Cyber operations echo Sun Tzu. Economic sanctions echo Sun Tzu. Proxy conflicts, covert influence campaigns, and strategic deterrence all aim to produce maximum impact with minimal financial exposure. Whether they acknowledge it or not, today's great powers still operate within the framework of Sun Tzu's balance sheet. And perhaps his most enduring lesson is how he defined national strength itself. For Sun Tzu, power did not rest solely in armies or weapons, but in economic resilience, a state's capacity to absorb shocks, recover quickly, and continue functioning when pressure is applied.
Sun Tzu wrote in a time when entire kingdoms collapsed after pouring resources into wars they could not afford to finish. Our world faces the same problem, just in modern form: ballooning defense budgets, mounting debt, fragile supply chains, resource dependencies, and the hidden long-term costs of projecting power abroad. Sun Tzu might not recognize today's weapons or technology, but he would immediately recognize the arithmetic behind them. The deeper lesson, the one most readers overlook, is that Sun Tzu was never trying to teach rulers how to win wars. He was teaching them how to avoid financial ruin. His real insight was understanding that the price of conflict lingers long after the fighting ends. States don't collapse because they lose battles. They collapse because they exhaust the capital that holds them together, economically, socially, and politically. In Sun Tzu's framework, victory is meaningless if the treasury is empty afterward. The ideal war is one that doesn't require rebuilding the economy once the dust settles. Seen through this lens, the art of war transforms into something entirely different. It's not a celebration of boldness or aggression. It's a manual for restraint. It's not about crushing opponents. It's about enduring longer than they can.
Sun Tzu doesn't glorify conquest, he glorifies stability. To him, the ruler who safeguards resources is wiser than the ruler who captures cities. The general who prevails without fighting is wiser than the one who annihilates armies. And the state that knows when not to act is stronger than the one driven by pride. Sun Tzu's philosophy isn't the mindset of a warrior chasing glory. It's the mindset of a steward, someone charged with protecting the long-term solvency of a nation. Ultimately, Sun Tzu's financial genius lies in his refusal to separate economics from power. He understood they are inseparable. War, in his view, is simply the most expensive policy decision a state can make, and any ruler who misjudges its cost signs his own decline. His message is simple, unsettling, and timeless. Strength isn't measured by how hard you strike, but by how much striking you can afford. History consistently shows that when financial systems collide, it isn't the bravest nation that endures, it's the most economically disciplined. History doesn't repeat itself, but if you fail to understand it, the price is always the same. If this shifted your perspective, consider subscribing. History holds the answers, and I'll show you where to find them.